When irrational terror takes to itself the fiat of moral goodness, somebody has to die. No man lives who has not got a panic button, and when it is pressed by the clean white hand of moral duty, a certain murderous train is set in motion. Arthur Miller. The Walking Dead, Season 2, Episode 1, What Lies Ahead. Trigger warnings for this episode are suicide, missing persons, religion, and gun violence. Please stay safe and stay sane. Thanks for listening. Hello everyone and welcome back to Feed Don't Eat Your Brain. I'm Zachary Ballard and with us today is Donnie Owens. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Donnie.
Hi there. Yeah, my name is Donnie. I am a graduate instructor up at USU, just kind of living life. Had the awesome opportunity to come on this podcast with Zach. Known him for a few years. He's a really super creative and just really intelligent guy, and I'm so excited to be on this podcast.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Another person. So he went to USUE before my time there, and did theater there. So that's kind of how we came to know each other a little bit. Haven't hung out a lot though, which is sort of a downer, to be honest. But you know, I come to school and they're like, "You're the new Donnie, Zach," and I'm like, "I'm the new Donnie." And then I met Donnie. I was like, "Yeah, I'm the new Donnie."
Yeah, no, it was very much the same on my other end. I'm like, yeah, you got to meet this guy Zach. He's like the new you. I was like the new me, and like I met him, we shook hands, and it was like kind of like that instant thing. Yeah, like I feel that.
Uh-huh.
I am both happy and sympathetic that you had to take on that mantle. You know.
Oh
it's,
yeah.
It's
it's a hard mantle to take on for sure. So have you watched The Walking Dead, Donnie?
I have. I've admittedly only gotten to like the first 3 seasons, and I kind of got away from it. It's hard for me to kind of stick with a lot of shows these days, but I really did like the first couple seasons I saw, and some really solid characters and character interactions.
Yeah. That's usually how, like, that's usually when people have dropped off that watch The Walking Dead, that were just sort of like, because like season 4 and season 5 are pretty low energy. But yeah. So you'd consider yourself like a fan? Like, how much of a fan would you be of The Walking Dead? Would you?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a really good question. I wouldn't consider myself a diehard, I think, by any stretch, but the episodes I have watched, I've really loved the interactions, and I think it plays on some very human moments. And I guess the crux of it is being human and maybe trying to hold on to humanity in a place where we don't have the normal social rules that we usually do because we're just all trying to fight to survive. So it plays at some very great character interactions, and some really hard questions are asked by it. So yeah, I do find myself really liking the show.
Yeah, for sure. So what do you think about this episode in particular?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on. It really, obviously it starts out kind of crazy with this horde just, going through the highway, and just kind of so much confusion with everyone trying to find shelter. Andrew has that really close moment, kind of having to break down and get that zombie kill herself.
Yeah.
And obviously they're trying to find Carol's daughter. Gosh, what's her name? It's
Sophia.
Yeah, there we go, Sophia. Yeah, and just that's like the main kind of the main point of the episode, and they're all trying to do the best they can, faced with either expending the resources and looking out for Carol, who's already been through so much, and kind of losing hope slowly that they're going to find Sophia. And there's a lot going on. It's a solid episode.
Yeah, for sure. It's a really good first start to the season. So I wanted to talk about like the choices that people make when they're panicking versus when they're not panicking.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw like 4 distinct things. The first one I want to talk about is T-Dog. The horde is coming down the road, and then he like panics and falls and like cuts his arm really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then he starts panicking more because he is bleeding out essentially. And then Daryl, not panicking because he's Daryl.
He's Daryl.
I don't
yeah.
think I've ever seen him panic. But he's not panicking, and he basically saves T-Dog's life. And I just think like how bodily injury can really make us panic even more when we're in those dire circumstances. So what do you think about that?
No, I think that's a really good point. I think bodily injury, for me, I haven't had as much experience with bodily injury personally, and which is surprising because I'm the clumsiest guy you'll ever meet. But I think what fascinated me about that scene is I think just of course, Daryl's always kind of made out as the guy who was prepared for this kind of lifestyle and prepared for a situation like this. Whereas I think a lot of folks who just kind of live their day to day normally were always kind of cautioned to really think and consider and make decisions. And in a scenario of just normal day to day life, you don't really, you do have to make those quick split second decisions, but we also are cautioned to have that time to think. And here we see someone who is injured and who just has all the other sense knocked out of them and is kind of frozen by this indecision. And then you have Daryl coming up and really just being able to make that quick split second decision because likely, him and Merle were kind of raised to make those split second decisions. And yeah, no, that it's really interesting too how like the physiology affects that decision making process because now you're not just having to deal with the stimuli of this impending decision. Now you're concerned for your health, and now you can't think clearly because of it. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, yeah, and like since my marriage, I have cut my finger really bad, like twice. And I even start panicking from that. Like I'm losing a ton of blood, and I'm getting lightheaded, and
Oh yeah.
and that gash would have made me pass out immediately. I feel like, and so it's sort of interesting to see like because and I talked about this a little bit last episode, but when you're from an outside
Mhm.
perspective and you're not panicking, you can see what to do. You can see basically like, okay, just do this, like get under the car. And but when you're in that situation, fully in it, it's so hard to like
Mm.
think logically when adrenaline is just pumping through your system.
Well, yeah, and I think like that like fight or flight type response it has such an effect on that too. And injury and pain is really one thing that can get us in that zone. I've recently started doing a little bit of boxing, and
Hell yeah.
I'm still pretty introductory, still pretty bad at it. But I've done sparring a little bit, and just it really does kind of ring true the expressions. Everyone does have a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And my first time sparring, I had all these plans, all these things I wanted to do to kind of implement what I'd learned, and I got punched in the nose once, and I just immediately started panicking. I started like searching for a corner to try to like regroup myself. It
uh
didn't even hurt that much. Like it was just the shock of everything. I'm like, I actually got punched in the face. Like, oh hell, this happened.
yeah.
So like it really does kind of shock you and put you in a place where you kind of have to change tactic or really consider different things than you had to before. So yeah, it's funny how pain can just put you in that sense of shock.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And like I in one of my auditioning classes,
Mhm.
we were talking about when the adrenaline like dumps in your body before you're about to audition or
Mm,
even before you're about to perform and stuff. And we were trying to train our bodies to not allow the adrenaline to drop.
mm,
And cuz whenever I go up to an audition and I am just spiked on adrenaline and I'm just like my mind is going a million miles an hour and it really affects the work I do.
mm,
But I've noticed for sure that whenever I slow down and don't allow the adrenaline to drop into my body, I give such better work because I'm not so wired
mm.
essentially. I'm not high basically.
Right.
Um yeah. And then another example is Andrea. This made me so upset because if she would have just chilled out and stayed quiet and not tried to get her gun put together, then she would have been okay. It was the fact that she like felt like she
Hmm.
needed this gun in order to live when she wouldn't have gone through that situation if she just stayed calm and quiet.
Yeah, no, I was actually watching the episode a little bit this morning, and just I without fail, every time I see that, it's just you see the walker is almost out of the car, almost out of the RV. It's like, okay, we're good.
Mhm.
She's averted it, and every time it's just the little clink. Just
Yep.
and obviously there's a lot going on in that situation. Obviously, maybe she wouldn't know if there would be another walker coming right in and seeing her, but just being able to take a second to breathe, kind of like you were saying a bit ago, right, with the audition. If you can realize that yeah, adrenaline is a good thing, and it can help you to kind of channel that energy, but it can also really be an inhibitor if you're kind of wired and not able to channel your intelligence and your wherewithal in a good way. It can be an inhibitor for sure. So
Yeah.
she kind of allowed that to take over and just like you said, focused on the gun and that being the number one priority rather than just surviving that moment. So that's kind of a choice she made in the moment was picking. Latching onto the gun and making sure that was put together rather than just surviving the moment.
Yeah, and we saw a lot of arguments within the entire episode about like guns in general and who gets to carry a gun.
Mm-hmm.
And even when Rick caught up to Sophia, Sophia panicked and was like, "Get the gun, shoot them." But it would have made things way worse if they actually shot a gun at any time during that, because then the horde would have came back to them. The horde would have known they were there,
Yeah.
and it's so like for some reason Andrea thinks that guns are the most um like are the best weapon to have in these situations when they're not. Like
Mm,
I personally think guns make things more dangerous, and I think it's because Andrea is in a constant state of panic, and she's in a constant state of like, what if this happens again? What if I get attacked again?
mm,
And she feels like that gun is her safety net
mhm.
when the gun is a safety net for a short period of time, but then that safety net is going to just open up and cause you to fall on the ground
Mhm.
even harder, if that makes sense.
No, and I think you bring up a really good point about like there being just a ton of conflict between using guns and having them be like I guess this instrument of just it's almost like an instrument of saviorism in a post-apocalyptic world, kind of like this. And then you see at the very end, right, with Carl and the deer, that kind of becomes something
Oh yeah.
a gun maybe used a little bit too rashly or without forethought, right, becomes this moment that puts a really key character in danger, and suddenly everything's turned on its head again.
Hmm.
So yeah, yeah, I think it's a good discussion to have.
Yeah, and then the other issue we had with panicking is Sophia obviously panicked, and I mean, being a little girl that is
Mhm.
so helpless in this apocalypse has to be so traumatizing and scary. And I mean it's so interesting because Rick goes into action, and then he has Sophia hide, and they
Mm,
debate in the show whether that was the right choice or not. And I think Rick was panicking as well. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think Rick was panicking as well, just a little bit? Because I think he could have handled the two walkers if he just had Sophia hang back, and he would have grabbed the rock
mm,
and just um, killed them essentially. Then I think it would have been fine, and
right.
Sophia would have been with him. But I
Mm,
don't think he had to leave her there. What do you think?
yeah. It's interesting because we I study interpersonal communications, and one thing we were talking about this week is emotional contagion, which is basically it's a theory that we as humans we feed off of each other's emotions.
Mm,
It's kind of like an example is I think there was a commercial by Coke a few years ago where a man just starts laughing in a crowded subway, and suddenly everyone's just laughing with him because laughter is that kind of contagious emotion that we feed off other.
uh huh.
Fear and anxiety and panic, like kind of all clumped together within this episode, kind of show as a real
Yeah.
case of that emotional contagion, where if one person starts really just panicking, it just kind of spikes from there and it snowballs. So I do think that Rick kind of, I do think that he did jump the gun just a little bit, and I think that
Yeah.
like I couldn't blame him for it either because kind of like you mentioned, Sophia is just this little girl in Apocalypse, and I think like his first instinct was, okay, can I take these walkers and can I make sure the situation's safe? Instead of it being that, it was how do I get her to a place where she's absolutely safe? Because right
Yeah.
here isn't safe. But I do think right the tone in his voice and the way in which he kind of he talked to her, I did think it kind of had that emotional contagion effect and led to her running off. And I also think that also led to her, they followed her footsteps in her pathway. Daryl said, well, she was doing good until
Yeah.
here, and then she veered off the path. So because of kind of the emotional contagion that was going around, she wasn't really able to make that best choice. But yeah, no, Rick was definitely in a rough position. So it's hard to say exactly, but I do think he just a little bit too much.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean Shane even mentions like Rick told her exactly what to do, and Shane mentions like she was scared. Like you kind of have to think of what actually stuck of what you told her. And it's so interesting that when we're in a state of shock and fear that we just sort of shut down. We
Mm,
either shut down or we completely hyper focus, if that makes sense. But yeah, and then I wanted to talk about Carol. Carol's panicking essentially the entire episode because her daughter goes missing.
mhm.
And and Carol blames Rick basically the entire episode, and she says things to Rick that she probably wouldn't say if she wasn't panicking. And I also think that when you are panicking and you're in a state of fear and shock, it is so easy to say things that you normally wouldn't say because you're so
Mm,
scared. Like I remember you know learning how to drive, and this kind of goes back to what you call it, communication, um,
oh, emotional contagion.
emotional contagion. Yeah, my mom's freaking out because I'm a new driver and I'm nervous, and that makes me more nervous and makes me start to freak out. And then we both say things to each other that we wouldn't
Hmm.
normally say to each other, but because we're scared, it causes us to say those things.
Yeah, no, I think it's oh gosh, and it's so hard because that's how so many conflicts not only get started but get continued. Just because in our own state of fear and in our own state of panic, we're too kind of caught up in it to realize that we're furthering it and that we're also transferring it onto someone else, right?
Hmm.
And consequently, that as someone is speaking to us in ways that they normally wouldn't speak, right, due to the situation, that it's also because of that they're not like meaning to personally attack us or they're not meaning to elevate the situation, that they're just acting as we are. So it's yeah, it's super fascinating. I think there have definitely been times where like I have a little sister and I am fiercely protective of her,
Yeah.
even though admittedly sometimes she's a strong headed little thing. So I know that sometimes she gets herself into trouble, but like whenever I hear that my dad was like a little bit too harsh for her, I go like Papa Bear mode and I call and be like, hey, she called me, she was having a really rough time, like what the hell, like, and
Yeah.
I love my dad. We have like a really good relationship. So, but because I'm like so afraid for my little sister and I have those really strong emotions tied to it, it causes me to put aside like my admiration for my father and my knowledge that he generally knows best, and kind of jump into that more protective mode of, hey, I really don't care, but we need to make sure that our sister's okay here. And I think it's kind of how Carol reacts to Rick throughout the episode as well, right? She's shown some pretty good admiration for Rick in the past, and obviously a lot of people, pretty much everybody in the group at this point, looks up to Rick. But right now, all she can see in him is the guy who panicked and made the decision that led to her daughter being lost in the woods alone. So now that's elevated and she can't really think of anything besides that. So yeah, it really is interesting the way our emotions can just carry and carry and carry and make interactions just so much different than they would be.
Yeah, and Rick, throughout this whole series, Rick gets blamed for so much that, and
Mm-hmm.
Lori even mentions it. She's like, "Listen, none of you guys know what could have been done differently, what choices could have been made differently, and how do you know you would have made a different choice?" And
Mm.
Rick was the one that stepped up and actually made a choice. And so it's so fascinating how when a leader makes a decision that we disagree with or that we don't uh, like how quickly we are as not the leader, or I guess as followers, to
Mm.
judge the choice they made. When if we were put in that situation, how do we know we would have made a different choice? How do we know that that choice was um, the worst choice or the best choice that someone could have made? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and when people step up to be a leader, uh, they I think they sort of need to understand that they're going to face scrutiny because of choices they make that don't make everyone
Mm-hmm.
happy. But
Mm.
it's also our job to hold leaders accountable. But it's also important to realize that we don't know what choices we would make if we were in that same situation.
Well, no, yeah, I think it's especially interesting to reflect on this after a particularly grueling election cycle where
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
nation's divided about the role of a leader and what we should do. And you have, I think, at one time, I think both, really strong, if you're really strong leaning left or really strong leaning right, I think there was both a question of, well, how do we hold leaders accountable enough, but not just live to breathe and hate and question every decision they make? Because I think if I don't know, if you allow yourself to get swallowed up in that, then it does become pretty dangerous. And I also think that yeah, just in general, if you are um, you will often get a chance in your life to be able to become a leader and be put in a position of a leader that will give you the hindsight that just kind of smacks you in the face, like, man, this is what people have had to deal with. These are the types of decisions they have to make. So yeah, it's good to find that balance between saying, hey, I know that with my view of what a leader should be and what a leader should do, that this isn't a decision I could make. But I also have to be cognizant that I was not put in that position and that it's an extremely delicate position. So yeah, there's so much strapped on Rick's shoulders, and I think he does a good job of kind of showing humility, but also kind of standing firm in his decision
hmm
in that kind of interaction he has with Carol a little bit more than halfway through the show.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's so funny. Like every time I will say something that a leader has done, specifically that a president has done,
Mm-hmm.
and I complain about it or I say they should have done this differently, someone always comes at me as like, well, why don't you run for president then? Or why don't you become the president? Like you don't know what it's like to be the president. I'm like, you're absolutely right. I would not want to be president because I don't want that responsibility and I don't want to make those kinds of choices for an
Mm-hmm.
entire country, you know? And so you have to be willing to make those choices, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. So speaking of leadership, I Oh, it was so. I had to laugh because Andrea really wanted her gun, and no one was giving it to her. And then Rick's like, "Hey, Lori, here's a gun. You're not trained," and no one said ah because Rick is the leader,
Yeah.
it was just such beautiful nepotism because no one's gonna say anything to Rick because Rick is the leader,
Oh yeah.
and Rick just sort of became the leader. Like no one elected him, no one like
Mm.
chose that Rick is gonna be the leader, but it was
Mm.
so funny to see like whatever the leader does, everyone just sort of follows along with that, you know?
Yeah, no, and it's just man, I forget the name of the actress who plays Andrea, but man, she did just a killer job. Just her little subtle facial expression of just
Hmm.
looking
Yeah,
looking kind of shocked, but not really, and also just pissed.
yeah. She's been gunning for that gun all episode, and then everyone's like, "Yeah, Laura can get a gun." And it's just so funny how, like Andrea even mentioned that she's the odd man out along with Shane,
Mhm.
and when you're the odd man out and the leader disagrees with you, then you kind of get shafted over and over and over again, you
Mhm.
know. And I was at work last night,
Mhm.
and um okay, how do I say this delicately? So there were some issues going on at work,
Mm.
and someone was trying to get a hold of our boss to try to figure this out,
Mm.
and the our boss was not answering, not picking up the phone, not answering even the text, and then the person that was coming in to switch shifts with that other person that was trying to call gets
Mhm.
in, realizes the situation, calls our boss, and then our boss immediately answers this other person, and then the other person was like they were so mad, and I it just reminded me of that like there's so nepotism is so real
Oh yeah.
and you don't realize it, and then the other person was like, oh, it's just him being him, and then the other person was like, that's easy for you to say because you're in this position where you can say that, so
Yeah.
I just thought it was really funny. um
Well,
yeah.
it's interesting how it's interesting how I don't know I think a lot of people would assume something like nepotism would I guess fade or go away in like the case of a zombie apocalypse, right? Because sometimes we assign like the label of authority only to like official titles, like, oh, he's the manager,
Hmm.
he's the boss, he's the president or whatever, and maybe that would go away once it's just kind of every person for themselves. But it lives in our everyday interactions. It's kind of to a lesser extent,
Hmm.
the whole Andrew situation kind of reminded me of when a less popular kid in a group of friends like makes a joke and everyone's like, that's kind of funny, and then like 10 minutes later someone makes like almost the exact same joke. It's a little bit more popular. It's like, hey, great one, Kyle. And it's we,
Yeah. Yeah,
we
I was definitely the kid that would make a joke and no one would listen to me, and yeah, it's fun. um
it's not fun. Yeah.
yeah. So I saw a lot of themes within this episode of it's sort of hard to explain and put into words, but essentially like you have two choices and it doesn't matter what choice you make, it
Mm-hmm.
will still go to the same outcome. First thing I saw was well, first let me talk about when Rick is talking to Morgan on the walkie-talkie, and he says this just dramatic irony line for if you've seen the series of hopefully things will get better, and and I'm like, oh, they're not. I'm so sorry, and I just thought that was so interesting, and they did a really cool cinematic shot where they were like leaving Atlanta, and then
Mm.
the car goes from the sunlight into the shadows, and I thought that was really cool. I thought I would just mention that, but so one choice I saw was that they saw this traffic jam on the
Mm.
highway, and then Glenn's like, well, we could go back and go through this other road, and then Dale was like, no, we don't have the gas to spare, but then the hose broke, and
Mm-hmm.
so that choice, like, it doesn't matter what choice they made, the hose would have still broken,
Right.
and a lot of time I've talked about this a lot before, but just the a lot of times we bog ourselves down with like, if I made this choice, if I made this choice, then things would have turned out differently, but
Mm.
we don't know what choices we make that turns things out differently than what they would be, um because
Yeah.
the hose would have still broken, and
Mm-hmm.
and that that thing that happened seemed to be a bad thing in the moment, and it turned into a bad thing because of the horde. But then it was able to be turned into a good thing because they were able to get supplies, get more gas, and then they were able to siphon enough gas to go back to the place that Glenn mentioned in order
Mm.
to get through the road. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think I think we become so obsessed with like decisions that I guess we hold ourselves hostage with the question of like what if, like gosh, like what if I done this, what if this outcome had been different, and we do that both reflectively looking back on things, and we do it in the moments when we're making decisions like gosh, what if I pick this path, and everything that I've worked for crumbles of, and maybe it could, but it's kind of reminds me of I was talking to my sister the other day, and she's preparing to go to college, she's about to graduate, and she's kind of stressed out about, well, which school should I go to, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
it's a big decision. And I think a lot of times we kind of bank that as, oh, this is setting up the rest of my life, and my life's going to be so different wherever I go. And I. I'm not a firm believer in destiny. I don't believe that there's like a delineated like forethought of our lives that we always will follow that path down. But I do
Yeah.
believe that there is a reasonable certainty that if we make the same decisions that align with our personality and our morals, no matter the environment, that we will end up where we're supposed to end up, and things will kind of work out in a similar way. It's kind of like the concept of the one, I guess, when we're talking about romantic interests. Oh, there has to be the one that I'm looking for. It's like,
Yeah.
gosh, there are 7 billion people on the earth. If you think that your
That.
destiny is to find one person, man, good
Yeah.
luck. But
Yeah. I believe that any like people vibe with different people, and anyone can be with 10, 20, can be compatible with 10, 20, 50, 1,000 people, because there's
mhm,
so many people on this earth, and you're not destined to just one person. Speaking of which, Shane and Lori
mhm,
had a connection, and obviously Lori and Rick are compatible together.
mhm.
And Lori makes me so mad because she's the one that told Shane, like, "Hey, stay away from my family." And then Shane's like, "Fine, you want me to be a dick? I'll be a dick." And then he's a dick to Carl, and Lori's like, "What are you doing? You broke his heart." And I'm like, "That's your fault, dude. That is literally your fault." And and we and I mean, Shane and Lori are so imperfect people,
Mm,
and they both talked about them making choices
mm,
that weren't good choices, and those choices that they made led them down this path of further turmoil and distress.
mhm,
And but I mean, we don't know if anything changed or if anything was different, those those choices may or may not have been made, or they
mm.
wouldn't have gone through the same issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Cool, 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 cool. Yeah, just Lori, she makes me so mad. And yeah,
And like her like self-righteous
uh,
tone that she has when she talks to Shane, like too. It's like you just crushed him. It's like it's like he wasn't like too mean to Carl either. He just kind of said, hey, like just go take those over to Daryl. Go take those axes over to Daryl. Like that's cool and all, but and like he kind of dismisses him when he's when they're searching for Sophia in the woods. It's like, yeah, we're trying to look for
mm-hmm.
Sophia. So I feel like, yeah, I feel like Lori just and Shane's got
Oh
his
yeah,
own problems, absolutely. But I feel like she's projecting her insecurities that she has with her relationship with Rick definitely
yeah,
onto the situation with Shane. And she doesn't really have stability in either, so she goes back and forth on her decisions with both, I think.
yeah, yeah. I think so, and I think she wants Carl to be happy,
Mm-hmm.
and Shane helps Carl to be happy. Carl, I have to say that every
Carl!
episode. Uh, and Shane obviously makes Carl happy and stuff, but uh, I don't know, man. I I don't have a lot of sympathy for Lori in this episode. And then there's like uh, I think if Rick was still alive and they were
Mm,
with them, then Lori probably wouldn't have cheated on Rick. But these these choices that they made, I don't
mm,
know if they would have made them any differently if Rick still wasn't there. Like they were bound. I think they were sort of bound to make those choices with Rick not being there, and that
right.
just caused them to snowball down this event, down these events that just pulls them further and further apart. And then Shane and Andrea talk about leaving, which
Mm-hmm.
is is interesting because I mean Shane doesn't want to deal with this drama anymore, which I think is a very
Mhm.
mature decision to make. To be honest, I
Yeah.
think it's very like if he's in love with Lori but realizes that he can't like have Lori, then I think that's a really mature decision to just slip away. But I also think it's more dangerous for him and Andrea to have
Mm,
them be just two of them, you know. And
yeah.
if they made the choice to leave, then you know things might get worse, things might get better, but you don't know until you make that choice.
Yeah, no, and I feel like it's a selfless decision from Shane here because I think he probably realizes that hey, I'm
Hmm.
this is if this starts coming out into the open, this is going to cause Rick a lot of pain, and I also can't be around Lori with the way the situation is, so I'm just going to do what's easiest for all of us. Well, and what is going to be more difficult for me, and just leave.
Hmm.
And then I think one of the reasons he gets so affronted from Andrea is the now it's not just his own selfless decision. Now there's someone kind of rolled into it, and that kind of takes that's another thing about decisions, right? Is even one more person included in the decision in any way can influence so much of what this decision means to you and your perceived consequences, and that's a whole nether, I guess, branches to the timeline of what could happen.
Yeah, for sure.
I also like that you bring up like the idea that maybe Frick was or wasn't around, that the same decisions would have been made. It kind of plays to the idea that maybe we are influenced by outside
Hmm.
forces as far as our decision goes. Kind of the aspect of integrity, right? We are who we are when no one is watching is who we really are. But I guess those outside influences can only have that influence on us to a point, and maybe we'll always just end up making the decisions that will reflect bestly our self concept and what we truly want. So maybe Rick was just the obstacle that didn't happen to be there for the situation to kind of progress the way it was. So yeah, that's all really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And um, I don't know. It everything just comes down to choices, and we never know what choices we're gonna make is gonna affect our lives for the good or for the better. And sometimes we don't have a choice. The
Mm.
one choice I saw that I thought was really interesting was when Shane finds the water and then immediately like starts pouring it, and I'm like, okay, I understand. Like you're thirsty, you're freaking hot and sweaty. But me and Alina, we were like, he's wasting a lot of water that could be used.
Yeah.
Like why not get everyone in a line and give them like a cup of water, you know, have them fill their containers. But you know, like, and it was sort of that rash choice of like, I'm thirsty in the moment. I need this water right now to be poured on me, which
Mm.
is interesting. Okay, I wanted to kind of talk about Andrea's choice to commit suicide, and Dale sort of forced her hand to not die the way she wanted to,
Mm.
because Andrea like it's so interesting because Andrea wanted to make a choice to not die by being eaten alive and torn apart. Um, but then again, that choice didn't just affect her; it affected Dale as well, and also, I don't know. It's kind of tricky. Like, what do you think about that situation?
I think it's so delicate. That one, it always gets me because you can see both perspectives. Like they have merit in both, right? Obviously, Dale has kind of the
Hmm.
fatherly or grandfatherly even kind of perspective of just looking out for
Yeah.
somebody and trying to make sure that they're safe and they're okay. And even though that's not guaranteed where they are, like they want to make sure they're okay for as long as they can be, and kind of that protective nature. So I definitely see how that's a obviously we want people to be okay, and if we know someone's about to make a decision that'll impact their lives like that, we
Hmm.
want to kind of step in. But gosh, in a situation like The Walking Dead, where so many choices have been taken from you that you normally would have, right? Like to have the choice
Yeah.
to go to work, or have the choice to go out to lunch with your friends, or simple things like that, to larger things like the choice to who you have to be around with to survive. So many choices have been taken from you in this
Hmm.
situation, and perhaps one of the most sacred choices left with everybody is how they live and how they die, how they decide to die. So and it's I think anytime we're put in a situation where we feel that our choices are taken from us, we just it's a really hard crisis to go through. It's in a lesser example, perhaps when we're kids and we're in obviously under our parents' household. That's one of the reasons why we seek to express ourselves in every little way we can. Dyeing our hair a certain way, or maybe going through a rebellious phase and wearing all black clothing or whatever. It's because so many choices are not ours, and we want to make sure that the ones that we do have are made by us. So it's really interesting, the contradiction
Yeah.
between those choices and those perspectives.
Yeah. That's cool. That's cool that you bring that up. Is the we we thrive on having choices and wanting to keep choices and stuff. So yeah, I really like that. Um, so another choice that I saw, I don't know if you noticed this, but when Carl went into the forest to go help look for Sophia, he was wearing camouflage,
Mm,
and I don't know if you noticed that, but that choice just to wear camouflage,
mm,
like they didn't know that someone was going to be hunting, someone else was going to be hunting in the woods. They didn't know that that was going to happen, and it's just that small choice. Like if Carl was wearing maybe bright
mm,
orange, then that might have affected the outcome, but we don't know, and I'm sure the decision of bringing Carl out there probably destroyed Rick because I mean he made that decision and then Carl got really hurt. And so I just think the idea of choice, um, and even circling back to choices we make when we're panicking,
mm.
it's just you never know what's going to happen. So you might as well just like make the choices that you feel right in
Mhm.
making and then just continue on. I mean, I don't think I would ever make the choice unless I was hunting to wear camouflage,
Yeah.
because that's just not right for me,
Mhm.
But uh, um, but yeah, it's just fascinating. I love that little detail that he was wearing camouflage.
Well, it just goes to show, like, we're all just these imperfect, weird little people acting with the limited information that we have about the day and about the world. We have no idea.
Hmm.
Like, we have a pretty general idea of maybe what's going to happen with our routine when we go out the door. Right? We're gonna go to class, or we're gonna go to work, and maybe we'll see Jim from the
Hmm.
office, things like that. But as far as like those basics, point A to point B, we have really no idea what's going to happen and how even the smallest thing like wearing a
Hmm.
certain t-shirt out in the mall where you might see someone who likes the same band or something and strikes up a conversation. We have no idea how those
Yeah.
little choices will affect us. And when we are, kind of like you mentioned before, circling back, when we are stressed and when we're hurt and when we have situations that shock us, suddenly that scarcity of data that we already had becomes even more scarce, and now we're just faced with like the
Hmm.
little things maybe we can control, like being able to stop the bleeding that is suddenly occurring, the ability to kind of shorten our breaths and make sure that we can actually breathe without hyperventilating becomes a more prominent decision than really focusing on what's outside of us. So yeah, it's kind of amazing how much little decisions can really affect us and our outcomes without us knowing it. I think that's why we can sometimes get frozen by decisions from, which major do I choose, or is this the right house to buy, to, should I go with a skinny latte or a normal latte today? Little things can just really freeze us.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right. I kind of want to talk about religion a little bit.
Mm.
Because we saw a little bit. My favorite line in the whole episode was Daryl saying, "You taking any requests, JC?" I thought, I'd probably say something snide like that if I was in that situation.
Mm.
But I wanted to talk about Carol specifically.
Mm.
And I genuinely don't think I would be very religious in an apocalyptic situation. I think I'd be pretty upset at God, and I would be pretty like, I wouldn't want to put my faith in him. And kind of delving into my personality, whenever bad things happen to me, I have a really hard time putting my faith in him. I would rather
Mm.
just get stuff done that I need to get done, and just allowing it to be made whole essentially. And
Mm.
so I
Yeah.
find it fascinating that Carol, she's gone through so much trauma even in her own life before this happened. Like her husband abused her husband abused her daughter, and then
Mm.
her daughter went missing, her husband died, and she still has so much faith that God will help her. And she even mentions like, I prayed for Ed to die, and
Yeah.
that's a sin. And I don't think that's a sin to pray that your abuser will be out of your life. I really don't
Mm.
think that is. And I find it so heartbreaking that she thinks she's being punished for doing that, for wanting a better life for her and her daughter. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, you bring up some fascinating points. I think religion in itself is such a especially in a land where like there's seemingly like no hope and nothing to really put your faith into. I think
Mm-hmm.
religion helps us to interpret the choices that we make, and maybe the choices that are thrust upon us and also the ones that are taken away from us. For example, she chooses to interpret, instead of Ed, just dying, and good riddance, while she still, obviously doesn't hold back any remorse for the man. She interprets that because she wanted Ed to die, that this is somehow her fault, right? And that her daughter is being taken away, and she pleads, "Please don't let this be my punishment." I think that was the most significant line of the episode for
Yeah.
me. Please don't let this be
Hmm.
my punishment. Kind of trying to negotiate and argue for maybe a different choice she can make and a different thing she could do to rectify this. I also think it's interesting talking about Rick's kind of approach to religion, being pretty blatantly
Oh
honest
yeah.
at the end there, right? Saying, "Hey, I've never been much of a believer, and you know that, but I need a little bit of something. I need a little bit of something to kind of push this through." And I think just I don't know. I think in a situation like this, I think it would both make people turn away from and go to religion where they hadn't before. And it's just interesting to see the way people
Hmm.
use religion to interpret the situations going on around them.
Interesting. I have a question about Rick saying, "Give me a sign, give me a little push." Because right after
Mhm.
that, Carl gets shot. Do you think that was the
Yeah,
sign?
yeah.
Because
You know,
yeah, Carl getting shot, seeing your kid get shot, scary, scary, traumatizing moment for any parent, right?
mm,
And
yeah.
and then Otis comes out. He's like, "Oh," and then Otis is like, "I have a
Mm,
farm." The They were like, Carl getting shot was awful, but then they were able to go to this farm and live on this farm, and
mhm,
they had no idea Sophia was on this farm. A
mhm.
spoiler alert, for
Oh
everyone.
yeah.
Sophia's on this farm, or she ends up at the farm at some point. Um,
Mhm,
and and then that's how, like, if Carl didn't get shot, they may not have found Sophia and gotten that closure, as well as they wouldn't have lived on the farm and lived on the safe place for a while. I mean, they don't know that Fort Benning is going to be safe or not. And so I don't know. It
right.
seemed sort of interesting that that seemed like his sign, e- even though he probably didn't want that sign specifically. That was a sign. God was like, "Okay, here you go, kid." Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like kind of a it's kind of like the old joke that of genies who grant wishes but make it just like a horrible interpretation,
Oh
of
yeah.
the wish, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, I want $1 million. Okay, yeah, fine. You have $1 million, in useless GameStop stocks or
Yeah.
something. Which, I mean, before this year would have been a funny joke, but maybe
Yeah.
not. But yeah, it's I think yeah, I don't know. That's just so fascinating that he asked for a sign, and the next thing his son's on the ground. And but I do think that a lot of times with religion, I think in my personal experience, I think we want the absolute perfect signs and the perfect nudges, like a light to shine, like on the certain direction we're supposed to go, or holy music to rise when we're waking up in the morning and about to make a certain decision. And it's not quite like that.
Hmm.
And I don't think that necessarily means that if I'm searching for answers, one of my buddies is going to get shot, and that's going to lead me to where I need to go. I certainly hope that's not the case anyway. Oof.
Yeah.
But I do think that when we're looking for I guess a turning point and a reason to make a decision, or something to shine new perspective, we don't always get to choose what that is, which is kind of frustrating within itself, right? When we kind of look to a higher power, or we look to maybe added inspiration from another source, what we find, I guess, isn't always what we'd like to find. So that's interesting there.
Yeah. And I mean, I find it always sort of funny when people pray about every little detail in their life, like, should
Hmm.
I do this, or should I, what should I eat today? And it's not a lot of people, but a lot of people pray about every little, like, some people pray about every little aspect in their life, when really it's just, do our choices limited by a divine being, or do we have
Mm.
full agency,
Hmm.
to make these decisions and to just live our life, or are like bad things deflected, or bad things caused by a divine entity? I don't think that question has ever really been answered, because
Mm.
we just don't know. And I think when people are looking for signs, they're going to find signs,
Yeah.
when we don't
Yeah.
know that it's a sign. It might just be what happened. And I used to, as a kid, I used to think like, oh, this bad thing happened because I did this sin, and
Yeah.
and now, like, I don't think that way. I'm like, well, this bad thing happened. I remember me and Alina got, basically our contract wasn't being renewed for another year at our
Mm.
old place, and we had to move in a month in Utah Valley, which was absolute hell because Utah Valley is the worst place to find housing. One of the worst places. I wouldn't say the worst
Mhm.
place. But um, and I remember going back to, well, maybe it's because of this, because I made these decisions that I'm being punished,
Mm.
and maybe it's because of this. But you know, I don't think that it was my decisions. I think it just happened. And I don't think, and
Yeah.
like it seemed like a really bad situation at first as well, but then we were able to move into a better place, if that makes
Mm.
sense. So yeah, it's all like this whole episode is all intertwined with making choices, whether it's a divine being that makes your choices for you or punishes you,
Mm.
or like how we make choices in the heat of terror, and how we make choices as a leader and what affects that. It's really, really, really fascinating
Mm.
stuff.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's I think sometimes too I think we seek to I think we try to match every consequence with every choice, which I think it can be helpful to
Hmm.
maybe take account of your life and maybe see what's brought you to where you are now, and even in a good way, what things have contributed to where you are, and where you want to keep going. But I also think if we I don't know if we like painstakingly try to ascribe every detail of our lives that's not right with something we did wrong, I think we prevent ourselves from making future choices if we kind of turn the focus on that to we sinned or we did something bad, we made a mistake, to the how can I use my agency to make a different choice. I think there's a lot to do with the
Yeah.
mindset we have at confronting those decisions and confronting those consequences. I think we've seen in the episode examples of things that can freeze people and leave them kind of bewildered, or ways in which happenings can motivate people to other choices.
Yeah, and I do think we don't realize the power we have in the choices that we make,
Mm-hmm.
and how that affects our lives and the lives of other people. I mean, I think we have immense power of our agency and our choices, and our choices of our lack of choices, I guess, of choices that we make, like lack of pursuing a choice, I suppose. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's all really interesting stuff. All right, well, we will be back with a short musical break, and then we will be back with a moral dilemma. And we are back. Thank you guys for listening again. So, here's your moral dilemma, Donnie.
Yep. Sounds
So,
good.
when is it, um, let's see, when is the time,
Mm-hmm.
so a missing person, someone goes missing, when is the time to stop looking for them? Like, how long do you wait to stop looking for them? And when do you decide they're just gonna be gone? They might still be alive, but they're gone. They might be dead. Like, when is the decision where you just
Mm.
decide to move on?
I think this is a fascinating question, especially within the episode, because you can kind of see it. You can kind of see it happening in increments depending on the character. I think Dale might be like the first one to kind of voice it out loud. It's only a matter of time really before we have to start considering the possibility that we won't find her, or that we at least won't find her the way we want to find her,
Hmm.
and just kind of starts preparing himself for like maybe that more rational side. And then of course you have the opposite of that, which is
Yeah.
Carol, who is just holding on to, as a mother should and would, and as a parent would, to any shred of hope that they're going to find her. And I think too often we just place this question on the in the context of time, like how many days, like how many hours, which is it's all important information to consider. But I think my answer would probably have a lot more to do with the resources that you've exhausted. How large is
Mm.
the area where we're talking about? If we're talking maybe about a nationwide manhunt and they were abducted in a car, that certainly complicates things. How many people have you
Hmm.
talked to, and uh, because I think there's a point where you do end up doing more harm than good if you are just continually dragging out the process, and you're preventing the family from moving on. If you're saying no, there's still hope, there's still a chance, and it's been like 2 months and you haven't found anything, you haven't found any new developments or anything like that, there is a hindrance in that. So I think my answer would probably be when you know that you've exhausted every possibility that could get them home within a month or within a couple of weeks would be my like short version of the answer. But it's such a hard call to make because you never know.
Yeah. Well, I know of situations where like, and my mom even told me that if I like went missing, that she would leave the porch light on constantly as
Mm,
sort of like a beacon, I suppose, to like hope
yeah.
that I would come home. And when I was about 10
Mhm.
or 11 years old, there was this in Utah. There was this case. Did you hear about the Susan Powell case?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, people are suspecting that her husband killed her. I mean, her husband was pretty manipulative and abusive,
Mhm.
and so it was easy to suspect that he killed her,
Yeah.
whether accidentally or otherwise. But I mean, no one could find her body anywhere. They found leads and they would just run dry, you know, and
Mhm.
they couldn't convict him because they couldn't find a body. And so, and there came a, and my mom was following that case so much, but there came a point where I was just sort of like, I think it's time for the family to move on. Like it had been
Mm,
a year of hearing constant like, what is going on with this, and I was just sort of like, you know, there needs to be a point where you
mhm.
need to decide that this this is a possibility, no matter how hard it is to make that decision,
Yeah.
that this person may not be coming back at all in this
Mm,
life, and that it is not healthy for us, as a family or as a community to hold on to this
mm.
awful thing that's happened, because then we're going to be stuck living this over and over and over, and it's not mentally or physically healthy for anyone to continue to be in this constant state of hope and dread,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah, I like that, this constant state of hope and dread, because I think in a situation like that, those emotions kind of go hand in hand. This kind of reminds me of definitely a less serious example, but I wrestled in high school. I was a very subpar wrestler, pretty
Uh-huh.
dictionary definition of average. But we went to a region
uh-huh.
tournament my junior year, a 7 hour drive. We almost won the region championship. We ended up losing by 3 points, which in wrestling terms is very close margin. Basically, if one person had done just one more thing right, if one person had just scored a couple more points in their match, then we basically would have won. And so that 7 hour bus ride was one of the worst experiences of my high school career, and I always remember it because for the week and a half after leading up to state, our coach had to sit us down at one point and say, "You guys need to get off the damn bus. You guys came home, but I don't think you ever really got off that bus." And I think in a lot of ways, more serious things, of course, like this, when a child goes missing or something so tragic like that happens, there comes a point where you do need to take that step and kind of allow yourself to move forward, not definitely not forget your child, definitely not forget the tragedy that happened, but to allow yourself and others, like you mentioned, the community, and especially in The Walking Dead, where everyone so much depends on each other, to kind of allow everybody to move
Hmm.
on.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Well, um, what do you guys think, listeners? You can comment on the Instagram and Twitter posts that will be posted, about this episode. You can also email us at feeddon'teatyourbrain at gmail.com. I also just made a TikTok, and I will be posting videos alongside zombie content along this podcast, things like that on TikTok. It's called Feed Don't Eat Your Brain. And also like, subscribe, share, and review this podcast. That will help a lot to help this podcast grow, as well as follow Fortin Horseman on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And because we're going to be posting a lot of short films this upcoming holiday season. So thank you guys for listening. Have a good night, day, whenever you guys are listening to this. All right, see you guys later. Bye bye.